Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 2022 mystery thriller, The Outfit. Now, before I get around to sharing more of my thoughts on this film, I want to give a special shout out to Will for requesting this review. And if there's another film, TV show, or topic that you would like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to my PayPal. The link will be in the video description down below, and I'll try to get to it as soon as I possibly can. Now, The Outfit is a movie that went way under the radar for me, and I really didn't know of this film until it was requested for me to watch. And it's one of those movies that, in all honesty, I probably would have never taken the time to sit down and watch it unless it was a paid request, because it's a part of a genre that I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of. The poster and the trailers, they didn't really do a whole lot for me. But I'm glad that I was requested this film because I liked it. I liked it quite a bit, actually, and I think it's a gem in its own right, especially when it comes to how well it crafts the mystery and the thriller aspect of the plot. This is a film that felt very old-fashioned, very old school in terms of the way that it weaved its story and its characters. And I've seen other critics compare it to something that you might see from Alfred Hitchcock, and I could see that. I could definitely see that, because the way that this film is directed, the way that the film is written, the way that the film is structured is very much akin to classic Hitchcock, because of the fact that it takes place in one setting. In this instance, it takes place inside a cutter's shop, and it deals with a small, select group of characters. And the suspense is from mainly one thing. Like, how is Leonard, the cutter, how is he going to find a way to outsmart and trick all these people around him that are trying to kill him and his fellow employee, this woman, who works at the cutter shop, who in some ways he kind of views her as a potential apprentice, even though she's not necessarily as interested in the business as he is. But he views her in a lot of ways as family. So he wants to do whatever he can to protect her from the mob that has them in their sights. So it's a simple, straightforward concept and plot, but Hitchcock proved, as well as other writers and filmmakers in the past and in the present, that you don't have to have a really complicated, very in-depth plot with tons of twists and different angles and all of that to have an effective story. Sometimes you can have just one setting, a small group of characters, and just a simple game of cat and mouse. And I feel that The Outfit is a great example of that. It's really quite a fine game that is played throughout the film. That does have some twists and some turns in it that genuinely did surprise me, that I didn't quite see coming. And there was enough things that it would give you in terms of a little hint here and there of potential twists and turns in the story that kept you engaged, despite the fact there's not a lot of action in this. There's a lot of dialogue. And like I said, it takes place in one setting, so there's really not a lot of um, extra intrigue when it comes to showing different settings throughout the story. So it just gives you little nibbles here and there to make you want to continue to eat the cheese, so to speak. And that enables it to ultimately place its trap and grab you and just keep you glued to the screen until the film's ending. It's directed by Graham Moore, who also wrote the film along with Jonathan McClain. And I think Graham Moore did a magnificent, just really marvelous job directing this movie. It's a period piece. It takes place sometime after World War II. And I think it takes place during the winter or around the holidays, which is why you have a very wintry, snowy uh, look to the outside. And there are some other things that might be there in terms of decorations or for the art direction that ties into the holiday season. And it provides a nice contrast to what ultimately becomes a pretty bloody mess by the end of the film. Now, another thing I want to point out is I just love the way that the film is lovingly and lavishly put together visually by the director. I think he definitely had a love and a compassion for the art of cutting, which cutting is not the same as tailoring. Cutting is when a professional, a expert in their field, cuts a garment to specifically fit an individual. They do sewing, they do things like that, but they are much more than a tailor. They create the entire outfit, so to speak. So the outfit title, when it comes to this movie, actually has a double meaning. It's not just this shadowy mob run organization that could be potentially running things behind the scenes when it comes to this plot. It also represents the line of work that Leonard it does. And I really loved the way that the film started off. It was very slow, but it was still very fascinating because I didn't know a whole lot about cutting, and I didn't know there was a difference between a cutter and a tailor. And the way that it's structured is almost as if you're watching a documentary about how cutters work, how they perform when it comes to their tasks. And just the way things were shot was very documentary like, and then had narration from Leonard, who is detailing the different steps when it comes to the cutting process. And it was something that was just really intriguing. And then it turned into something I wasn't necessarily expecting as the film went along. I was already interested in a drama about the life of a cutter in Chicago after World War II, and just really just his day-to-day dealings and operation. Like, that honestly would have been fine with me if that's what the focus was going to be, but then it turned into a mystery. It turns into a situation where the son of a mob boss, he winds up at the shop. He gets killed by his rival within the mob because the cutter played the two against each other. And then it turns into this whole sort of thing where the cutter and his employee, the woman, the I'm trying to remember, yeah, Mabel, the receptionist, she is now in the middle of all of this. And as the script and the story goes along further, you find out that she has even more to do with this plot than you might initially expect going in. and that just adds even more intrigue to things. And just the way that Leonard is just pulling the strings when it comes to what's going on with the mob bosses, the mob boss who's trying to find his missing kid, as well as this tape that supposedly has all these recordings of their dealings, and it can incriminate them, and so they want this tape, but then so does the mob boss's rival, who is the head of another competing mob. So then the two mobs collide, and Leonard and Mabel are just in the center of this maelstrom, so to speak. So it's a very, like I said, it's a very straightforward, kind of been there, done that sort of plot line at its core. But when it comes to just everything else that's around it, it's just really well done mystery and drama. And a good reason for that is the combination of skills presented by the writer and director. Good job setting up the visuals in terms of where the audience should focus on, in terms of the certain aspects of the plot that are trying to potentially reveal something. Also, there are certain scenes where there's suspense and genuine tension because the audience is made aware of where something is, but the characters in the film, not all of them are aware of it. So you have that whole sort of uh, tension where it's this whole game of, will they find it? Will they find the body of the mob boss's son? Will they find Richie? And it's that whole sort of thing where you're like, you're in suspense because you don't want Richie's body to be found, because if his body's found, then Leonard and Mabel are gonna die. And so it's that sort of thing. And it does a great job emphasizing a lot of those moments of tension. And it does a great job even in the slower moments that are just more heavily relying upon dialogue, because the director does such a great job bringing the right amount of mood and atmosphere to the sequence. And like I said, the writing is just so terrific. It's top notch. It's got a sly, sardonic, dry wit to it at times. And it does a good job really providing a genuine amount of depth for a lot of these characters. The dialogue, I think, is quite remarkable on numerous different instances, just in terms of the back and forths, and just how realistic and just how genuinely human the dialogue and the banter between characters feels. And like I said, it has some legitimate twists and turns in the plot, some reveals that are quite captivating, and some you might not necessarily see coming, and it just adds up to being a rather satisfying suspense film. And as good as the direction and the screenplay is, this is also a film where the success is very heavily reliant upon the right cast. In particular, the right lead to play Leonard Burling, the cutter, who is essentially the mastermind behind everything. You have to believe that he's smart enough to pull this off. You have to believe that he can convincingly play a vulnerable character in terms of him manipulating the other mob characters to make them think that he doesn't know anything, and he's just an innocent pawn in all of this. And there also has to be something about this character that is inherently likable, that draws you to this character, that makes you sympathize with this character when the story is trying to do something like that, and at the same time make you root for this character, for him to succeed in pulling the wool over these mobsters' eyes. And the wrong kind of performer could make the entire thing unravel. But that's not the case here. I mean, Mark Rylance, he was just amazing. He was absolutely phenomenal as Leonard. I was completely captivated and just glued to the screen when it comes to every scene he was in, because he just did such a great job playing this role, making you believe all these different facets of the character that were necessary to make this character really resonate with the audience. And just it's amazing that such a soft-spoken character could have so much impact. And in large part, yeah, it's due to the direction and the writing. But really, when it comes down to it, when it comes to a character like this, it's up to the actor to really take all of that and make it into something that really does leave a significant mark. And Rylance, he knocked it out of the park. He was so good. He was so phenomenal. And he even learned how to cut. He learned how to sew. He learned how to do all of these things for real when it comes to the profession that this character uh, was given in the story. And I thought that just made the performance even more authentic and even more believable. And you also have Johnny Flynn, who plays Francis, who is the rival mobster who's a part of the mob, who's competing in a bit of a power struggle with the mob boss's son, Richie, who's played by Dylan O'Brien. And Johnny Flynn, uh, he was a legitimate intimidating presence, because he really did have this vibe that was just dangerous and kind of unpredictable, and the kind of guy that would do anything in order to get what he wants. And to be honest, he was even more intimidating than the mob boss himself, Roy, played by Simon Russell Beale. And Dylan O'Brien had his own intensity as well as Richie, but he was a character, at least when it comes to what Dylan was given. This was a character that seemed like he was a little less rough around the edges. Like Francis was a jagged kind of character. Richie, he wasn't necessarily dull, but he was sharp, but there weren't as many jagged edges. So he was more like a sharp knife. And the performer who played Francis, Johnny Flynn, he was more like a serrated blade. And Dylan O'Brien, I really thought he did a great job with the few scenes that he was in, because ultimately his character dies at some point in the film, and despite the fact that he's not in it a ton, I still feel he definitely left an impression, and a very positive one. Dylan O'Brien, I think, is an underrated actor anyway. He was great in Love and Monsters, and it was nice to see him again. And I still think, even though he's older now, if they did that Batman Beyond movie within like the next 2 to 3 years, I think he could still be a good Terry McGinnis. I really do. But that probably will never happen. But at least Dylan's still getting good work, and I'm happy for him, because he deserves it, because he's a talented actor. You also have Zoey Dutch, who plays Mabel. She's good as well, but not quite as good as the rest of the cast for me, because there are some moments with her performance where it's a little off. Like, there's a whole scene where she's supposed to be, I think her character is supposed to be distant and not really connecting with Leonard, and I get why she's doing the scene the way that she's doing it, but it just comes across as if her performance is just very robotic when it comes to that sequence. She doesn't blink, she doesn't show any compassion, any emotion at all on her face or in her eyes, and especially when you compare it to what Rylance is bringing to the table, it's just no contest. And so there are some scenes with her performance where it's not really up to par with the rest of the cast. And I don't know if that's necessarily her fault when it comes to her limitations as an actress, or it's the director in terms of not getting the right performance out of her. But yeah, it's a performance that's good, but it's not great because of these moments where it really isn't up to par with the other performers. Nikki Amuka Bird plays Violet LaFontaine, who is the member of the competing mob. She's not a member, she's the head of the competing mob. And she was fine. She's not in it enough to really leave much of an impression, good or bad. So I don't really have much to say about her. But and she did an okay job. But really, the film, the majority of the scenes focus on Mark Rylance, Johnny Flynn, Zoey Dutch, and Dylan O'Brien, as well as Simon Russell Beale, who I want to give him a little bit more credit to as Roy Boyle, the mob boss, because there was a certain sense of levity and kind of fun with this character that I liked, but then there was this sinister nature to the guy, where at moments it could be like a teddy bear, but then at other times he could be as vicious as a grizzly, and I really liked that dynamic when it comes to the performance from Beale as Boyle as the mob boss. The film also features some cinematography by Dick Pope, which is, it definitely doesn't suck dick. Like, it's some nice looking cinematography. The film doesn't really have a lot of moments to really make cinematography shine or really pop visually, because it's very limited in terms of its setting. But it does a good job still bringing the setting to life in terms of the cutting shop and even the little bits that you see outside. And there's almost a sense that it kind of looks like a Norman Rockwell painting at times, which I think is intentional. I think it's supposed to look like that and have that sort of vibe and feel to it when it's not being intense and genuinely violent, because this film does have a fair amount of blood in it at times. It's absolutely R-rated. I mean, when people get shot, there's blood and it's spraying everywhere, and there's a whole finale that involves Leonard using his cutting shears and putting them to use in a very gory fashion. So it's not what I would consider a horror film or a slasher or anything like that, or it's also not one of those things where the gore, when it does show up, it's something that is, that creative or really a crowd pleaser like it is for other films that have blood and stuff like that. But it still works, and it fits the film and the vibe and the tone of the story well. And I think the cinematography matches the tone and what the director and the writers were going for, uh, like a glove, or a nice fitting suit. And then you have, speaking of a nice fitting suit, I think it has some really excellent editing by William Goldenberg, because there's a lot of moments where there are a lot of sort of things going on in any given scene. There's a lot of mind games that are happening. There's a lot of stuff that's being hidden from other characters, and there's just a lot of back and forth in that regard. And I think the film, if it had a lesser editor, these sequences could come across a little clunky, a little choppy, a little hard to follow. But that isn't the case here at all. Um, Everything is sewn together really tight when it comes to the editing. It features music by Alexandre Desplat, but the score really isn't much of anything. Like, it's there, it's fine. It sets the mood decently enough, but it's not anything that's really gonna be one of those scores that you will remember or hum notes from it after the film is over. But it serves its purpose well enough. It's kind of like the buttons on a suit. Well, not really. The buttons are really important, but it's kind of like maybe like a little added touch on a suit. Like, it's not the most important thing, but it's still there and it's decent enough in terms of like the little design on the suit, so it doesn't really distract or take away from the overall aesthetic. And it is absolutely a low budget film. Like, it's only a movie that costs like 5 million, and it definitely does look that at times. But at other times, I think they did a good job working with the low budget in terms of creating an authentic looking period piece in terms of the costume design and the production design and art direction. And it really does look like it could potentially take place during that era. It doesn't look fake or inauthentic when it comes to what it's trying to do when it comes to that time period. And at 106 minutes, I mean, it goes by at a decent enough pace because of how drawn in I was with the plot and the story and with the characters, in particular the Cutter, Leonard, and his past, and whether or not he's going to be able to save the present for himself and for Mabel. And yeah, overall, I liked it. I liked it quite a bit, and I would recommend it if you like old school, old fashioned mystery thrillers, where it's along the lines of classic Alfred Hitchcock. But anyway, that is my thoughts on The Outfit. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you later. See ya.